Josh Rogin, Chaos Under Heaven, Trump, 11, and the Battle for the 21st Century. Dive into the chaotic world of the Trump administration and its handling of the ever-complex relationship with China in Chaos Under Heaven, Trump, 11, and the Battle for the 21st Century by Josh Rogin. This fascinating summary unravels the intricate nuances of the United States' approach towards China, highlighting the fundamentally different views held by various members of Trump's administration. Gain insights on historical U.S.-China relations, China's global ambitions, and the difficult diplomatic balancing act that unfolded as China's human rights violations, technological espionage, and international influence came to light.
Trump's China Quandary. The Trump administration grappled with the unpredictability of dealing with China when it came to power in 2016. For years, the U.S. had aimed to foster a more democratic, open China through economic support. However, this approach had become largely ineffective by the end of Obama's term. China's use of technology to expand its economy did not result in a more democratic country but rather in a more aggressive, nationalistic, and totalitarian state. As the Trump administration settled into the White House, it had to navigate the intricately tangled economic and ideological networks that link the U.S. and China. When Donald Trump won the U.S. presidential election in 2016, not only did he surprise the world, but also the Chinese government. Expecting a more conventional diplomacy with Hillary Clinton, the Trump administration's arrival meant China had to brace itself for an unpredictable opponent. The U.S. had a history of supporting China economically since President George H.W. Bush's tenure. The belief was that aiding China's development into a thriving international economy would eventually make it more democratic, a strategy followed up until the Obama administration. But by the end of Obama's term, this approach had lost its footing. No one could have predicted the revolutionary impact the internet and digital technology would have on global dynamics. China aggressively harnessed these tools, unapologetically hacking into corporate systems and stealing intellectual property. Beijing coerced international businesses into joint ventures, facilitating easier access to copyrighted materials. Alarmingly, the Communist Party's control over Chinese businesses became evident, as they could demand access to technology and data virtually without refusal. Rather than using this power for democratic growth, Beijing deployed it to strengthen their military and tighten surveillance on citizens. Instead of prompting democratization, as the U.S. envisioned, the boom of China's economy in the Internet age fueled a rise in nationalism, totalitarianism, and oppression. The Trump administration had to confront these glaring challenges and untangle the web of intertwined economic and ideological connections between the U.S. and China. Ultimately, Washington's division on the matter led it to struggle in presenting a unified voice when dealing with Beijing. Trump administration's China clash. The initial meeting between Trump administration officials and a Chinese diplomat in December 2016 set the stage for the internal conflict and chaos that would ensue. Key players were divided, with Jared Kushner and his allies representing those seeking diplomacy and improved relations, and Steve Bannon with his group of hawks looking to challenge and undermine China. This division led to upheaval within the administration and constant changes in its lineup. However, economics professor Peter Navarro's trade policy persisted, seeking to hold China accountable for unfair practices. Throughout the turmoil, the Chinese position remained clear: as an equal, they would not accept any challenges to their sovereignty or integrity. The December 2016 meeting between Trump administration officials and a Chinese diplomat marked the beginning of a tumultuous chapter in U.S.-China relations. The American representatives, including Jared Kushner, Steve Bannon, and Peter Navarro, held vastly different opinions on how to approach China, leading to both internal and external chaos. Kushner's deep-rooted connections to China through his family's business dealings and his admiration of former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, known for improving U.S.-China relations, made him a proponent of diplomacy with China. Wall Street veterans like Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and former Exxon CEO Rex Tillerson also supported this approach, leading to Kushner being dubbed the China Dove. In sharp contrast, Steve Bannon and his group, known as the China Hawks, considered China an enemy and sought to undermine the Communist Party rather than work cooperatively. This vast difference in ideologies set the stage for ongoing internal clashes within the Trump administration. As the lineup of administration members shifted, with Bannon and the first National Security Advisor Michael Flynn being asked to step down, the chaos only escalated. However, Peter Navarro, an economics professor and hawk, managed to maintain a lasting influence with his trade policy designed to hold China accountable for its alleged unfair deals and business practices. During that fateful December 2016 meeting, Navarro attempted an aggressive approach but was quickly reprimanded by the soon-to-be Deputy National Security Advisor, K.T. McFarland. Unfazed by the internal disorder of the Trump administration, Chinese diplomat Yang Jiechi remained steadfast in his message: China must be treated as an equal, and any threats to its integrity or sovereignty would be unequivocally rejected. Throughout the Trump administration, the internal discord between those advocating for diplomacy and those demanding a hardline approach shaped not only the administration's China policy but the overall tumultuous nature of the administration itself. Trump's trade tug-of-war. President Trump sent mixed messages during his term, including a disruptive call with Taiwan's president that strained China-US relations. This controversial incident ultimately led to trade negotiations and a friendship between Trump and China's President Xi Jinping. Nonetheless, Trump's actions left American supporters of Taiwan and hawks who wanted a more aggressive approach discontented and hoping for a chance to press their agenda. In his early days in office, Donald Trump stirred confusion and conflict by accepting a congratulatory call from Taiwan's president. This gesture angered China, which perceives Taiwan as a rebellious province, as it signified validation of Taiwan's autonomy. Although the reasons for Trump's acceptance of the call remain debated, it took months of backpedaling to smooth relations and open discussions on a trade deal with Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Trump's ultimate desire was to host Xi at his Mar-a-Lago retreat in Florida, marking the commencement of extensive trade talks. Eventually, Trump apologized for the Taiwan debacle during a call with Xi orchestrated by Jared Kushner and Ambassador Cui. The apology opened doors for a Mar-a-Lago meeting, where they discussed a trade deal. However, this turn of events frustrated China hawks, including Steve Bannon, who urged leveraging Taiwan to advance U.S. interests. National Security Advisor John Bolton and a Republican senator indicated that Trump was effectively abandoning Taiwan and Tibet's sovereignty, deviating from the stance of previous administrations. After Xi's Mar-a-Lago visit in April 2017, Trump embraced his new friendship with China's president for life. The meeting appeared to prevent a trade war, and Trump agreed not to label China as a currency manipulator. The two countries entered a 100-day, comprehensive economic dialogue to pave the way for future collaborations. Although this mirrored the Obama administration's approach, it left China hawks and Taiwan supporters disheartened, anticipating the dialogue's failure and envisioning a renewed opportunity to push their agendas. Trade talks and Trump's unwavering friendship. Trump saw Chinese leader Xi Jinping as a CEO best approached as a friend for successful negotiations, despite warnings that accepting his friendship could prove detrimental. China's lack of progress in trade deals led to the Trump administration's hawks initiating a 301 investigation to allow the White House to introduce trade tariffs. Tensions and disagreements within the administration led to a fluctuating approach to China. Xi understood the power of friendly gestures towards Trump, using them to their advantage. In President Trump's perspective, establishing a personal rapport with Chinese leader Xi Jinping was crucial for securing deals. Trump believed that forming a mutual admiration with Xi can significantly impact the positive outcome of any negotiations, much like courting the CEO of a corporation. His persistence in pursuing a friendly relationship with the Chinese leader continued throughout his term, even though many recognized this strategy as a potential pitfall. Prior to their first meeting, members of the National Security Council cautioned Trump about engaging in strategic talks with Xi and accepting the Chinese leader's gestures of friendship. However, the president disregarded these warnings, maintaining that Xi was his friend even after repeated evidence to the contrary. China's unwillingness to make concessions or engage in new trade deals demonstrated their staunch position in the matter. As a result, the administration's hawk saw an opening and initiated a 301 investigation, a policy tool designed to pave the way for introducing trade tariffs on China. Spearheading the 6-month-long endeavor was Matt Pottinger, a former Marine who was well-versed in Chinese studies and fluent in Mandarin. His mission was to scrutinize China's business practices to determine their threat level to national security. Throughout the investigation, the administration was rife with conflict, as the hawks and doves engaged in verbal altercations in front of White House staff. While no one in the administration contested China's manipulative tactics, such as stealing intellectual property and attempting to control international waters in the South China Sea through man-made islands, opinions varied drastically on how to handle these issues. The proposal to impose tariffs on Chinese steel and aluminum was met with both support and opposition from key administration figures. Trump's stance on dealing with China shifted frequently. When negotiations faltered, he would lean towards aggressive measures, but when relations improved, his outlook towards she became friendlier, allowing the doves to take charge. She recognized this pattern and knew that a kind gesture towards Trump would be sufficient to alleviate tensions. Unmasking China's human rights abuses. In 2018 and 2019, the world began to uncover the extent of China's human rights violations, particularly against ethnic minorities like the Uyghur people and Tibetans. The Chinese Communist Party's efforts to suppress cultural and religious practices and establish a dominant Han Chinese culture came to light, thanks to brave individuals like Vera Zhou. Despite President Trump's seeming indifference, her testimony galvanized bipartisan support in the U.S. to address these abuses. A year after President Trump's visit to China in 2018, a veil of secrecy still shrouded much of the country, largely due to the Communist Party's control over information through censorship and propaganda. While some knowledge about oppression against ethnic minorities such as the Tibetans had circulated, the struggles faced by the Uyghur people in Xinjiang remained relatively hidden. China's human rights violations became increasingly apparent in 2018 and 2019. Both in Tibet and Xinjiang, the regime enforced laws that restricted cultural and religious practices. By sending Han Chinese, the ethnic majority, to these regions, the government aimed to impose a culture more aligned with the party's vision. Many of these Han Chinese also acted as spies for the government, reporting on neighbors for seemingly innocuous activities. In Xinjiang, Uyghurs deemed a threat were sent to internment camps, where their every move was monitored and they were separated from their families. Chinese officials considered these issues non-negotiable, and even presented reformed internment camp members to U.S. officials, praising President Xi Jinping. Surprisingly, President Trump appeared to agree with keeping these topics off the table. In 2019, according to John Bolton, Trump told Xi that building internment camps was exactly the right thing to do. However, word about the harsh realities within these camps began to spread, thanks in large part to individuals like Vera Zhou. The University of Washington student spent almost 2 years in an internment camp after visiting her family in Xinjiang and using a VPN to submit college assignments. The U.S. State Department eventually negotiated her release, and she defied the Chinese government's orders by publicly sharing her experiences. Though President Trump may have seemed indifferent to human rights abuses in China, Vera Zhou's story struck a chord with the American public. Her courageous testimony energized both Democrats and Republicans, leading to a stronger push for addressing these abuses. The bravery of individuals like Vera Zhou is essential in exposing the truth about China's human rights violations and inspiring collaborative efforts to confront them. China's global reach. In recent years, China's influence has expanded substantially, and the world began to take notice during Trump's presidency. The Chinese Communist Party aims to increase its international strength and influence, using various means to achieve it. Notably, China currently holds significant sway over the World Bank and the United Nations, with officials occupying key positions within these organizations. Additionally, the Chinese government pursues international influence through the United Front Work Department, which engages in efforts to spread communism and shape politics, media, and technology in favor of China. In the United States, the organization has funded think tanks and cultural institutions like the Confucius Institutes. With over 500 of these institutes worldwide, the FBI labeled them as non-traditional intelligence-gathering entities, urging for increased protection of research from Beijing's persistent interest. China's rising aggression unchecked. In 2019, China's increasing dominance and hostile actions, both domestically and internationally, were becoming impossible to overlook. Despite Trump's trade deal with China remaining elusive, even Vice President Mike Pence publicly criticized China's aggressive stance. China's growing power in the tech sector became a concern, particularly with the arrest of Huawei's CFO, Meng Wanzhou. Trump's decision to deal with Huawei left many perplexed, while his unwillingness to stand up against China's escalating grip on Hong Kong and other regions also garnered attention. China's influence reached new heights when it managed to coerce the NBA into an apology after a supportive tweet for Hong Kong protesters by the general manager of the Houston Rockets. As the year 2019 dawned, the gravity of China's transgressions on both national and international levels grew increasingly evident. While Trump's trade deal with China continued to be unattainable, even the Vice President Mike Pence couldn't help but voice his disapproval of China's belligerent behavior. Pence's speech in October 2018 shed light on Beijing's United Workfront activities, and pointed out the anti-Trump articles China had planted in several American newspapers. Journalists interpreted this as a possible indication of a new Cold War brewing between the US and China, which could potentially center on the tech industry. This notion gained traction at the end of 2018, when the US Justice Department unexpectedly arrested Meng Wanzhou, the CFO of Chinese tech giant Huawei. Wanzhou's arrest was based on her alleged violations of international sanctions by conducting business with Iran. However, the more pressing concern was whether Chinese telecom companies like Huawei could be trusted by the US. Given that Huawei and other corporations in China are subject to the Communist Party's control, the answer appeared to be no. This raised alarm over the possibility of having to surrender their data to the regime upon demand. In an unexpected turn of events, Trump declared Huawei open for negotiations, almost putting the company's U.S. market at stake during the U.S.-China trade agreement. However, he inexplicably modified his position while dining with Xi during the 2019 G20 summit in Osaka. Trump's decision to allow U.S. businesses to transact with Huawei left his administration baffled. The ongoing Hong Kong protests against China's tightening hold on the region were the conspicuous issue at the G20 summit. Nevertheless, Trump refrained from opposing China, seemingly swayed by the prospect of a renewed trade deal. Additionally, Trump chose not to intervene when China amped up its aggression towards international businesses that expressed support for Hong Kong or acknowledged the independence of Hong Kong and Taiwan from China. In a glaring display of its influence, China succeeded in compelling the NBA to apologize following a pro-Hong Kong tweet by the Houston Rockets general manager, Daryl Morey. Concealed origins, COVID-19. In early 2020, a tentative Phase 1 trade deal between the US and China marked a hopeful beginning, until a SARS-like virus began to spread. When the COVID pandemic emerged, the Chinese Communist Party's suppression of information hindered global understanding of the virus's origins. Beijing claimed the virus originated from a Wuhan seafood market, but suspicious activity at the nearby Wuhan Institute of Virology suggested otherwise. The institute was conducting gain-of-function experiments on coronaviruses, with one variant sharing a 96% genetic similarity to COVID-19. Despite questions surrounding the origins and danger of the virus, the Chinese government and President Trump downplayed the threat in the early months of the pandemic. Entangled US-China economies. The seemingly irrevocable economic ties between the United States and China have complicated the fate of the US's relationship with China. Although Trump's administration attempted to take a tougher stance against Beijing, financial links between the two nations continue to weaken America's negotiating position. A key example is the millions of American investors funding Chinese companies, unaware of their potential role in human rights violations and missile production. As the 2020 election approached, President Trump ceased any pretense of friendly relations with Xi Jinping, marking a decisive turn in U.S.-China relations. While the world battled a devastating economic downturn due to COVID-19, China sought to use humanitarian aid as political leverage. Amid this struggle, Trump constantly stressed the origin of the virus by referring to it as the China virus, and gave his administration free rein to announce sanctions and condemn human rights abuses. However, beneath the surface, the economic ties between the U.S. and China appeared to remain solidly intact. Deep financial connections persist between the countries, complicating their relationship. Countless U.S. investors have funneled funds into Chinese businesses, exhibiting a flow that shows no signs of stopping. Even stringent regulations on U.S. stock market listings and companies' intense scrutiny have not deterred investment in China's booming industries. Such investments have had a significant impact on the American population. Millions of people, including former military personnel, invest money in Chinese firms like Hikvision, which has technology ties to Uyghur internment camps, and the Aviation Industry Corporation of China. The latter produces missiles for Beijing's Air Force, prompting concerns that U.S. citizens might be funding weapons that could potentially threaten their own country. This startling revelation made headlines in 2019, leading Senator Marco Rubio to attempt pressuring MSCI, the world's largest index provider, and the Federal Retirement Board to better manage their indexes. However, his efforts were met with resistance, and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin ultimately advised Trump not to proceed due to market concerns and potential negative effects on MSCI. China's State Administration of Foreign Exchange currently holds $3 trillion U.S. investment dollars, providing crucial support to the Chinese Communist Party's stability. As long as this financial flow continues, America's bargaining power against China will remain limited. While tariffs and sanctions may offer temporary relief, future U.S. administrations must critically assess the intricate connections that bind the two countries together and devise strategies to untangle this economic web.
As Rogin's Chaos Under Heaven concludes, it reveals the immense complexity of the relations between the US and China, which are deeply entangled ideologically, economically, and technologically. The Trump administration was laden with internal divisions that created chaos during its efforts to tackle China's increasing aggression and human rights abuses. The United States has a significant financial stake in Chinese businesses, and these complex entanglements make negotiations increasingly difficult. Therefore, Rogin's book implores future administrations to thoroughly consider and untangle the connections that tie these two superpowers together, if they wish to approach China from a position of strength.